Now, on the streets of Minneapolis, at any day, at any time, you can see unmarked car with tinted windows, with masked men roll up anywhere in the city and grab people from the street and stick them in the car and drive away.
Obviously, I read your piece that you wrote, which we'll talk about in a moment. But let's begin on the kind of, well, you arriving on the scene of this latest shooting. Tell us what you found when you got there.
So we arrived at the scene in Minneapolis, I think probably about 5 minutes after Alex Pretty was shot by federal officers. And then so Mike Madison, the photographer I was working with, and we drove in, we followed the ambulance actually that was picking him up. And we got there and it was just chaos. It's freezing cold. I think it was about minus 20 in Minneapolis today. And his body had just been loaded onto an ambulance by the time we got over to them. And there was probably about a dozen ICE officers. And, they're masked, they're wearing civilian clothes, and they're armed, but they have like some flak jackets on top of their clothes. They were standing in the middle of an intersection. And then there were protesters that were kind of gathering around them. And people were just shouting like, you just killed someone. You just killed someone. And then so that's, I think, when we realized what had happened.
And what details do we have at this stage? I appreciate it's difficult to know exactly what unfolded.
So there's so many of the people who were there at the time were filming. So we've actually got quite a good sense, I think, visually of what happened. So like in the immediate aftermath of when he was killed, then probably about like 10, 15 minutes after, the officers started firing tear gas really, really, really heavily. And I ran into a building with one of the witnesses who saw everything that unfolded. And she told me what happened. And I think from the beginning of when she was telling me, it was just so clear that what happened didn't at all fit with the official version that was being put out by the Department of Homeland Security, where they were saying an officer was at risk, there was a violent protester who was armed and who was attacking officers and putting them at risk. From the witness that I spoke to, just like, in the kind of 20 minutes maybe after he was shot, it became really clear that that's not what happened. And then we've seen that borne out throughout the day in the videos. I think what we've seen, what we've been able to gather from videos from the scene, from witnesses that we spoke to, is that this guy, Alex Pretty, who's an ICU nurse, he was standing in the road directing traffic because ICE officers were blocking off the traffic. And then he gets kind of, the ICE officers they sort of start pushing around a woman that's near him. He moves over, seemingly to protect her, and an ICE officer maces him in the face. Sprays this like very kind of toxic irritant in his face, and then something happens, and a bunch of them, probably like 6 or 7, pile onto him and pin him to the ground. And then at some stage, they shoot him. I mean, there's 6 or 7 shots fired. And then so the Department of Homeland Security has gone out and said that he was trying to kill officers and that that he had a gun out and was trying to shoot them. But then that really, really doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, like it's kind of still unclear whether he was armed. He may have been armed. In some of the videos, it looks like he had a concealed carry pistol, which is, this is the US. It's pretty kind of normal. Lots of people have them. And so, yeah, I think details are still being really ironed out, but the heavy weight of the testimony that we're seeing from witnesses and from the videos shows that he was shot by ICE agents as he lay there on the ground.
What is the general mood in Minnesota? Because I know that you were there reporting anyway after the previous shooting of Renee Good and talking to people about the day-to-day experiences. Give us a sense of what it's like day to day on the streets in Minnesota right now.
So now on the streets of Minneapolis, at any day, at any time, you can see unmarked car with tinted windows, with masked men roll up anywhere in the city and grab people from the street and stick them in the car and drive away. This is something that we saw happen and there were alerts about it happening constantly when we were there. Over the last week, I mean, it's people that I've been speaking to, especially people who have brown skin. They're saying that they live in fear. We spoke to families who haven't left the house in weeks because they're afraid of being picked up on the street. So, and the mood's incredibly intense, incredibly tense. And there are just, I mean, I also can't overstate the level of response to this. You know, there's so many, probably thousands of people from Minneapolis who have come out to decry what ICE is doing and to organize in various ways to try and disrupt ISIS operations.
And children are being detained, aren't they, Louise?
Yeah, on Thursday, we arrived at a house just as a father and his 2-year-old daughter were detained. They just come back from food shopping, and ICE officers blocked off their car in their driveway, smashed in the passenger window, hauled the dad out. And when he tried to take his 2-year-old daughter out of the car, Chloe, and tried to take her into the house to give her to her mum while he was being detained, they instead shoved him into their car with blacked out windows and drove away with him. And Chloe, who is 2, and her dad were actually taken away to Texas, despite a judge having issued an order saying that they had to stay in Minnesota because Chloe needed to be reunited with her mum. And in the end, they were actually sent back to Minnesota, and she was given back to her family. But it's just incredibly chaotic. And I think there was in one school district in Minneapolis, and there's been 5 children detained now in the last few weeks. And so it's not an isolated case. There was a case earlier in the week. Liam Ramos, he was 5 years old. He was wearing a Spider-Man backpack and had a blue hat. There's a kind of a picture of him that's been going around. He was taken from outside his house when his dad was arrested, and he's now in Texas with his dad awaiting deportation.
Obviously, President Trump was elected saying that he was going to crack down on people who were illegally in the US. Is it clear that the people are being detained are illegally there?
Right. There is clearly a huge backing for Trump's deportation campaign from when he was elected. I think polls now show it's still about 50% of people support, getting violent criminals who have no right to be in the country out the country and then securing the southern border. There's still support for that. What there's not so much support for is the tactics that ICE is using to get there. 61% of respondents in a poll last week, and that's Republicans and Democrats and independents, said that ICE had gone too far in their tactics. And then in terms of whether the people that they're grabbing off the street actually are in the country illegally, some of them are, some of them aren't. I think when Trump was elected, he was sort of running on 2 contradictory ideas. One is that we're going to deport all the people illegally in the US, and that's like anywhere between 10 million and 20 million people. The other was, we're going to get hold of the worst of the worst. We're going to find violent criminals who are in the country illegally and deport them. So like these 2 different policies are kind of playing out at the same time, where the Republicans are now sort of saying they're doing one, but in fact doing the other. So I don't think it's in any way clear that the administration has not presented any proof that any significant number of the people that they've been grabbing off the street in Minnesota are criminals. Some of them might be in the country illegally, but I also spoke to a US citizen who's 19 years old who was picked up, arrested by ICE and taken to detention facility. And they knew he was a US citizen. He told them. They checked him on a database. They knew. But they still took him and locked him up for a few hours and then let him go. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're in the country illegally or not. And I also spoke to the family of a 19-year-old who's in the country. Like, she'd entered illegally, but she had a legal right to remain there. You can seek asylum or, can get a work permit. There's ways of being legally in the US, even if you did originally enter illegally over a border. But all of these documents, which would have, under any other administration, meant that you could be in the US and work and pay taxes and have a normal life. There's just kind of been this, ICE at the moment in Minnesota doesn't seem to believe that any of these are valid. So she was locked up and taken away, even though she did have these documents which should let her work and let her be in the US.